It was the kind of quiet, rainy afternoon that made the world feel slower, softer. Daniel, a 34-year-old architect from Seattle, wasn't planning to stop anywhere that day. He had just finished another long meeting, the kind filled with polite smiles and empty coffee cups, and all he could think about was getting home to silence. But as he passed a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, he heard music drifting out, soft piano notes, aching and beautiful, like someone playing their heart through every key. It stopped him in his tracks. Something about it pulled at a forgotten part of him, a part he didn't even realize was still alive. On impulse, Daniel stepped inside. The warmth hit him first, then the scent of cinnamon and espresso. But nothing hit harder than what he saw by the window. Her, Maya, the woman he had once loved so deeply, so recklessly, that it had left scars he still didn't talk about. She hadn't changed much. Maybe her hair was a little shorter now, her style a little more elegant, oversized sweater, simple gold hoops, a book resting open in her lap. But her eyes were exactly the same. Amber with a trace of storm. He froze for a second, unsure if she'd even recognize him. But then she looked up, and the moment their eyes met, the world seemed to pause. Not in a loud, movie-like way. It was quieter than that. More real. More human. She smiled. A soft, surprised, knowing smile. "Daniel," she said, like she had been hoping he'd appear. His name on her lips felt like a song he hadn't heard in years. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, walking slowly toward her table, feeling everything and nothing at once. She laughed gently. "I hoped you would." And just like that, he sat down. The rain tapping gently on the windows, the hum of people around them, it all faded into the background. They spoke for hours, slipping into conversation like they were still 25 and fearless. They didn't talk about why it ended, or the silence that had followed. They talked about books, about how cold the winters had been lately, about the things that didn't hurt. But under every word, there was something deeper. An unspoken ache, a familiar warmth. Daniel couldn't stop looking at her hands. The way she still tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. Maya told him she had moved to Vancouver, was teaching now. She looked happy, but Daniel could feel something else there too. A kind of longing. When he asked if she was seeing anyone, she paused for just a moment. Then came the words he didn't expect. "I'm married now. His name is Eric." And there it was, like a quiet knife. Daniel forced a smile. "I'm happy for you." He meant it, or wanted to. But somewhere inside, something twisted. And then Maya did something even more unexpected. She leaned in just slightly, voice soft but steady. "I know this is strange, but would you come to dinner? At our place. Next week." He blinked, unsure what to say. Dinner? With her and her husband. "Why?" he asked. Maya's eyes held, a mystery that made his chest tighten. "Because I think you need to hear something. From both of us." The way she said it, calm and sincere, made it impossible to say no. So he nodded. "Okay," he said, heart thudding like a drum. And as he left that cafe, Daniel knew something had just changed, but he had no idea how deep it would go. Daniel wasn't sure what to expect as he drove through the quiet residential streets of North Vancouver, rain lightly brushing the windshield, like a whisper. The invitation still echoed in his mind. Dinner with Maya and her husband. He had replayed her voice over and over in the days since they met again in that cafe. Part of him thought about canceling. But a larger part, the one that still wondered what if, had already said yes before logic could interfere. Her house was beautiful, not in a flashy magazine way, but warm and real. Brick exterior, soft porch lights, and the smell of cedar and rain in the air. When Maya opened the door, barefoot in jeans and a long cardigan, Daniel's breath caught. She looked like a memory he'd buried under years of pretending to move on. She smiled with a mix of nerves and warmth. "I'm glad you came." Her voice was softer than he remembered. Or maybe he was just hearing it differently now. Inside, the home was cozy. Plants in every corner, vinyl records stacked near an old turntable, framed photos of a life built together. Then came Eric, tall, calm, with kind eyes and the confident ease of someone who didn't need to prove anything. He shook Daniel's hand with genuine warmth. No tension, no fake smiles, just understanding. The three of them had dinner, roasted salmon, wine, and easy conversation that surprised Daniel. It wasn't forced. In fact, it was unsettling how normal it all felt. Maya laughed the way she used to, tilting her head slightly, brushing her fingers against her glass, and Daniel found himself falling into old rhythms without meaning to. But underneath the calm, his chest buzzed with quiet confusion. Why was he really here? That answer came later. After dessert, Eric excused himself to take a phone call in the next room. Maya reached across the table, her hand brushing lightly against Daniel's. Her touch still had the same quiet electricity. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. He nodded, unsure what was about to happen. "Eric knows everything. About us. From before." Daniel's throat went dry. "What do you mean?" "Everything." She looked at him, eyes wide with emotion. "He knows that I loved you, that maybe a part of me still does. And he's accepted it, in a way that I didn't expect." Before Daniel could respond, Eric returned. But instead of awkwardness, there was only calm in his posture. He placed a hand gently on Maya's shoulder, then looked Daniel directly in the eye. "Maya and I have had many hard conversations. We've worked through a lot. And one thing that became clear is that she's been carrying something unresolved. With you." Daniel could barely breathe. Eric continued, voice low and steady. "So we made a decision. One that's unconventional, maybe even strange to some. But it's real. Maya wants to spend a weekend with you. Just the two of you. No secrets. Not to start anything, but to end something properly. To say goodbye the right way." The room spun slightly. Daniel stared at both of them, unsure if he was dreaming. But their faces held no malice. Only truth. Only honesty. "Why?" he finally asked. Maya looked at him, and the weight in her gaze hit him like a wave. "Because I don't want to carry questions for the rest of my life. And I don't want you to either." And just like that, the walls around Daniel cracked. Because deep down, he realized he'd been waiting for this too. Not a reunion. Not an affair. But closure. A chance to step into the past one last time. To understand it. To let it go. Or to rediscover what never truly left. The cabin was tucked deep into the woods near Whistler, quiet and surrounded by trees that swayed gently in the mountain breeze. It was the kind of place people went to when they needed to hear themselves think, or forget the world for a little while. Daniel arrived first. He had barely slept the night before, caught between guilt and anticipation. This weekend wasn't about rekindling something forbidden. It was about facing the truth of a love that never quite healed. When Maya arrived, the air in the room shifted. She stepped inside slowly, like she wasn't sure how this would feel either. No hugs, no rush of emotion, just two people standing, face to face with the weight of their history pressing down gently. She wore a soft wool coat and no makeup, and Daniel realized with a quiet ache that she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. They made tea, talked quietly, cautiously. At first, the conversation was safe. Work, travel, weather. But as the hours passed and the fire crackled low in the stone hearth, something inside them both began to loosen. The distance between them shrank. Not physically, but emotionally. They sat across from each other on the old leather couch, wrapped in throw blankets, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't walked away?" Maya asked softly, staring into the fire. Daniel swallowed hard. "All the time." She turned to him, her expression open and fragile. "I thought about you the night before my wedding," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I didn't love Eric, but because I hadn't forgiven myself for walking away from you without an explanation." That broke something inside him. For years, Daniel had convinced himself that Maya had simply moved on, that maybe she'd forgotten what they had. But now, hearing her say those words out loud, he realized he hadn't just lost her. She had lost him, too. They didn't sleep together, not in the way people might assume. Instead, they fell asleep on the same bed, fully clothed, wrapped around each other like two people clinging to something fleeting. It wasn't lust. It was memory, comfort, the kind of closeness that only comes from deep, unresolved love. At one point in the darkness, Maya reached for his hand and whispered, "Do you remember that night in Boston? The rain on the windows? How you held my face like I was the only thing that mattered?" Daniel felt a tear slide down his cheek. "I never forgot anything," he whispered back. The next morning they cooked breakfast together in silence, but not the awkward kind. It was peaceful, familiar. She smiled at him over her coffee mug, a soft, sad smile that said more than words could. As the weekend drew to a close, they walked through the woods one last time, bundled up and close enough that their hands brushed with every step. "I don't regret anything," Maya said, stopping beneath a cedar tree. "Not marrying Eric, not this weekend. But I do wish we had ended differently." Daniel nodded, eyes misty. "Maybe we never really ended at all. We just paused for a long time." She touched his face, one last time, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw like she was memorizing it again. "Thank you," she said. And when they drove back to the city in separate cars, Daniel knew something sacred had happened, something private, adult, and deeply human. They hadn't broken anything. In fact, they had fixed something neither of them had words for. What they had wasn't gone. But now, it was finally at peace. 3 months had passed since that quiet, soul-stirring weekend in the woods. But for Daniel, it still lived in his chest like a half-forgotten song. One that returned in the quiet moments, like when he brewed his morning coffee or walked past the record store where Maya once dragged him in just to dance in the aisles. He hadn't heard from her since. There were no texts, no follow-ups. That had been part of the unspoken agreement, that what happened in that cabin would stay in the woods, a memory sealed with respect and maturity, not confusion or longing. Still, her absence felt oddly beautiful, like a candle that had burned to the end and filled the room with warmth, even as the wick faded. Then one morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, in a cream-colored envelope with neat handwriting that he recognized instantly. But it wasn't from Maya. It was from Eric. Daniel opened it slowly, heart racing, unsure of what he was about to read. Inside, the words were simple, but they shook him to the core. "Daniel," it began, "you might think I was crazy to let my wife go away for the weekend with another man. But it was never about permission. It was about trust, about understanding that before me there was you, and that some stories don't end just because a new one begins. Maya came back different, lighter, more present. Whatever happened between you two, thank you. You helped her come home to herself, and to me." Daniel read the words 3 times, each pass slower than the last. He felt tears sting his eyes. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. Grace, acceptance, healing. It struck him just how rare this kind of love was. Not just between him and Maya, but the kind Eric had. The kind that didn't try to own or cage, but simply held space. And in that moment, Daniel realized something. The story of him and Maya wasn't about who ended up with whom. It was about love in all its forms. The kind that burns fast, the kind that lingers, and the kind that lets go. Since the cabin, Daniel had started making small changes in his life. He picked up the guitar again. He started going on longer walks, sometimes without his phone. He even began seeing someone new, not because he was trying to move on from Maya, but because he had finally made peace with what they were, and what they weren't. He no longer needed to rewrite the past, or wonder how it could have gone differently. That weekend had given him something rare. Closure with kindness. Maya had chosen her life, and Daniel respected that. She hadn't betrayed anyone. In fact, she had honored the truth, and in doing so, taught Daniel that some loves aren't meant to be forever, but they are meant to change you, to awaken you, to remind you of who you once were, and who you still have time to become. And while he would never forget the way she looked at him that final morning, eyes filled with gratitude, not regret, he also knew he didn't need to chase that feeling anymore. Because it wasn't about recapturing a lost love. It was about releasing it and holding on to what mattered most. The peace that comes when hearts stop running from the truth. Some echoes stay with us, not because they haunt us, but because they once mattered enough to shape us. And Daniel would carry that quiet, steady echo of Maya, not in pain, not in longing, but in love.